This video is brought to you by Patreon provider Kyle.
Hello and welcome. A special thanks to Patreon provider Kyle for sending this in for review. Kyle actually reached out to me, I think it was like November or December of last year, asking me when he can send these things in for review. And it just happened that it wasn't going to work out for quite some time. Here we are, middle of March, and I finally have this in for review. What this is a primary arms 1:6 first focal plane featuring the ACSS Raptor Reticle. There you go. Try saying that 3 times fast. He's had this for quite some time now, and it comes with everything you see minus the throw lever. That is not part of the included kit, but you do get this nice little tab right there that you can at least index off of with your thumb, but I'm getting ahead of myself. This comes in at $400 US, and that's pretty inexpensive considering this is a first focal plane 1:6. I've been on such a run with these lately. It seems like everybody is interested in one of these. So it's fantastic that I got my hands on this. Now, you might be saying, see, this is cool for $400, but for $80 more, you can get yourself this. The SLX 1:8 first focal plane featuring the exact same reticle. Yes, for $480, you can get yourself a first focal plane 1:8 with a pretty nice reticle. I like the Raptor reticle, but again, more on that later. This comes exactly how you see it, and whereas the 1:6, you only have that little indexable thumb, this has that, but you can index it in 3 different locations, which is pretty cool. I just realized my camera wasn't focused, so I apologize for the slight blurring. So, what we have, 1:8 to the right, 1:6 on the left, are 2 first focal plane Chinese-made LPVOs, 1:6, 1:8. And they're both relatively expensive for what they are, but are they any good? Yes, you can buy a lot of stuff for little to no money, but does that make it worth it? Well, that's the question we're here to find out. I'm going to remove the scope caps for the remainder of this video because these are standard primary arms scope caps. They work well enough. As you can see, they have decent retention. They're not great, but they work well enough. If you're interested in getting a set, you already have it. So that's pretty cool, at least to have that included for the price. I obviously don't have any boxes for it because it just would have been too big and too expensive for him to ship it. So I settled for what I could, and here we are. With both sets of scope caps off, you can see that both of these have slight differences with how they orientate themselves. What I find to be actually interesting is if we put these side by side matching at the front, the 1:6 is actually longer than the 1:8. Now don't confuse this with the Japanese made 1:8, the PLX. Those go for 1,000, maybe a little bit more, and they're coming out with new versions that are even smaller, but don't confuse it with this. This is still a Chinese made. I mean, granted, it is proudly designed in Houston, Texas, but it is made in China. So don't get it twisted. Anyway, we're going to start with the 1:6 real quick, and we'll go back and forth. Fast focus eyepiece. Has no wiggle to it. It's nice and tight, and it feels typical primary arms. What that means is, for the price, it's acceptable. Primary arms do offer a lot of optics in a lower price bracket, and that's good if it's your budget. And for that, you have to be expecting of certain things. You're not going to expect this to feel like a Razor HD, for example. So this is perfectly adequate. Threads feel pretty good. There's no grinding or noise of any sort. And that's great. The 1:8 is a little bit tighter in the beginning, but as you start walking it out, it loosens up. All the way out, quarter twist in. See, now this actually has a significant amount of rocking to it. It's hard to, I can't illustrate this. This is all based on feel, but this is significantly more than the 1:6. The 1:6 is very tight. This has a very light wobble to it. On to the magnification ring. You can clearly see we have 180 degrees worth of throw. You can hear it binding a little bit in one particular spot. The throw lever, of course, makes this turning a lot easier. If I go around using that, it still turns okay. It feels fine otherwise, but you could hear it rubbing in a couple of spots. Again, that's fine. The 1 to 8 also is 180 degrees worth of throw. Notice that they are different rotation. The 1 to 6 would be, if we're looking from the rear, counterclockwise, whereas the 1 to 8 would be clockwise. Fascinating. Smoother than the 1 to 6. Feels very good, actually. Very well damped, and this thumb ramp is enough for most people. No matter what, it's better than the SWFA 1 to 6 HD, which was absolute shit. You couldn't use it without a throw lever. Full stop. Now, before we get into our illumination controls, I would just like to showcase the marks on the 1 to 6 from a set of rings in the past, and the finish on the 1 to 8 almost looks like it's not thick enough. It's almost like you could see the aluminum tube underneath it. It feels pretty good, but I'm left thinking that this is going to just wear out. In fact, you could already see right there. I would assume this is in a vertical mount. That might be as wide as an ADM. I would assume this is in an ADM. But, okay, enough of that. As you can see, on the 1 to 6, we have 1 to 11 with a single off. Positive click, very tight once it's there. Very tight. A little bit of wiggle, but that pop is really very, very nice. Under the scope cap, we find our standard CR2032 battery, our 3 prongs on the bottom. Ooh, a blue PCB board. Usually those are green. And we have our regular multi-leaf spring and a decent sized O-ring in the corner. Nothing to really write home about. Now, this is where the 1 to 8 might interest a couple more people, because this claims it has 2 night vision modes with, of course, no off in between. But it goes night vision 1, night vision 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to 9, then daytime 1, daytime 2. So there's still 11 brightness settings on this, but they just have different names. I'm wondering how these two are going to compare side by side. Anyway, it feels identical to the 1 to 6. Under the cap, no surprise there. We have the exact same PCB board and cap. The 1 to 6 comes in without the caps at 18.4 ounces, with the caps just over 19, which isn't that bad. And the 1 to 8, actually a little bit lighter, again, because it's a little bit shorter, sub 18 ounces, comes into just sub 19 ounces with the caps. With all of the caps off, you can see that we have the exact same turrets on both the elevation and the windage. Again, no surprise there. But one cool thing that Primary Arms did include were spare battery compartments on both of these on the windage side. So that's excellent. I don't know why more manufacturers don't include a spare battery compartment on the optic itself. It's not like you're adding that much weight. Really smart. Anyway, how do these things sound? There's a lot of wiggle, which is to be expected. These are the typical cheap Chinese turrets that we find on the SIG Tango MSR was one of them. Basically all the other Primary Arms I've gotten my hands on, and even some of the lower end Vortexes. So again, they're probably all coming out of the same-ish factory. But I will say, this, unless it's at its maximum travel, is very hard to turn clockwise as opposed to counterclockwise. This requires a lot more effort to turn. I don't know what's up with that. The windage seems to be a little more even, going left to right. Clicks are nice and positive. Clearly, you could hear it. But don't expect incredible precision on these. But you know what? As long as they work, as long as I could zero this thing and it holds zero and it tracks well, it doesn't matter, because you're going to set this and forget it. But it's always nice to see how well it's made. See, the 1 to 8 feels a little bit tighter than the 1 to 6, but that could have just been from normal wear and tear usage. And for good measure, they're all identical, with the exception of the 1 to 6 elevation being tight going clockwise. So there we have it. These two are basically identical with the exception of a couple of minor things. No surprise there. I mean, is anyone surprised? Absolutely not. Now, I'm only doing this sort of initial look side by side. I want to do both reviews independently and splice in some video of some opposing optics that, you know, you might be cross-referencing for this. But Enough of the talking, let's get behind these things and see what they look like.
Ah, here's a familiar sight. On the left we have the 1-6, on the right the 1-8. Both of these feature the exact same reticle, which I, again, kind of appreciate. Here at 1X, I think it's a more than usable size. Typically, they'll get way too small, and that's always going to be a problem if you can't see what you're trying to aim with, right? Illumination on both of these are good enough to create contrast on dark surfaces. Although I'm gonna have to give it to the 8X. I think it's like a half a shade brighter than the 1-6, which means that the turrets do something. When we take these to their maximum magnification at 30 yards here on this power transformer, of course the 1-6 does look better, and that's to be expected. But when we pull the magnification from the 8X back down to 6X, it's going to level the playing field pretty close, in my opinion. Other than that, though, the image and the reticle look fine on the 1-6. The 1-8 there at 6X definitely bridges the gap, but I think the 6X still has an advantage. But again, who's really using 6X at 30 yards? At least on LPVO. You're going to be out here 400 yards plus. Both of these at 6X here both look really friggin' good. I'm going to take the 8X to its maximum in just a moment, but just admire what we have here for a second. These are both really good looking images, and these are both really inexpensive LPVOs that are first focal plane. That's all for right now, though. Kyle, thank you so much for sending these in for review, and thank you all very much for watching. I'll see you again next time. And a very huge thank you to all of my Patreon providers. Without you, this wouldn't be possible. If you'd like to help support the channel but don't want to join my Patreon, I completely understand. But you can still help support by using my affiliate links in the description below. Thanks again for watching.